that engines were built to run on originally. When Sir Diesel created the diesel engine, he built it to run on peanut oil. Then they found crude oil. Coincidentally, he died shortly afterwards, and there was the evolution of the fuel industry and the diesel industry. So biodiesel essentially, in layman's terms, is cooking oil with additives which becomes diesel. So you can drive the biodiesel from multiple sources. The most practical source would to be from used cooking oil, because it's no longer valuable. And other sources could be from soya plants, agriculture, starch, and so on. So there are different ways of acquiring biodiesel, but the most practical way in today's market is to get it from restaurants' frying bins. I think biodiesel as a source of fuel is a much better alternative to the current diesel. So diesel is very dirty. If you've worked in a farm environment or seen the bottom of a diesel tank, there's often residue at the bottom with all the impurities that have sat in the diesel. So the refineries, when they push the diesel out into the marketplace, don't refine the diesel enough, then they don't clean it enough, which means that your engine is not burning efficiently when the fuel goes through the system, which creates exhaust smoke. And if you look at trucks and you scale it up, it becomes quite a nuisance in terms of all the harmful carbon dioxides and the filth within traditional diesel, or crude diesel rather. So biofuel and biodiesel in particular, being earth-made, the bio of the fuel, it is a lot cleaner, almost 85% cleaner to the engine, to the earth, the air, as well as the actual components within the vehicle and the operational temperature of the vehicle itself. So because you can drive it from the land and from waste, it's more effective on the pocket, it's more effective for the environment, and more effective for the vehicle. So therefore I would agree to say that biodiesel is a better option than diesel. Not enough people use it. There are a lot of reasons for that, but unfortunately it's quite a sad situation as to why. I think ultimately, if business wasn't the structure business currently is, then from a smart thinking collective, we would all be utilizing biodiesel worldwide much more than we are now. So at the moment, with the current structure of the fracking and deriving oil from the ocean, the quantity of diesel is a lot more readily available than the biodiesel at the moment. However, the infrastructure of diesel and oil has been going for decades, which means that there is a system in place. However, with that in mind, if we created a certain amount, or an ecosystem rather, that could support the production of biodiesel, it would be a plausible option and certainly a way to go about doing things. A lot of farmers these days, when I say a lot, a few farmers these days have been growing the stock for biodiesel, pressing it themselves and turning it into fuel and running their farms in a sustainable manner. So if we upscale that to incorporate industry as well as our daily requirements on the road, it could be something to look at into the future. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are challenges and regulations. Regulatory challenges are the first problem. So South Africa, for example, have mandated, it's a soft mandate, they have suggested or encouraged for fuel stations to put 5% of the mix per litre of diesel to be 5% biodiesel and then 95% regular diesel, which is a start. However, 5% is quite negligible in terms of the impact and the usage of the fuel itself. So if we could start looking at greater quantities and build it into our legislation as to the utilization of a greater portion of biodiesel in every single engine, car, bakkie, boat, aircraft, the industry itself would grow. So challenge number one is the legislation. Challenge number two is the actual OEMs, which is the original equipment manufacturers for vehicles, trucks, and so on. So the engine manufacturers like Volvo and Scania, New Holland, and a few other progressive OEMs have become quite au fait and quite supportive of biodiesel. Like, say for example, if a farmer purchases a New Holland tractor, he can run his entire tractor on 100% biodiesel under warranty, and the service and maintenance plan won't be affected. So New Holland are heading in the right direction. The Volvo, you can go up to about 30% biodiesel blend, which is 30% obviously biodiesel, 70% regular diesel, and then the Scania is also in a similar ratio as well. So you do have some forward-thinking, technology-driven manufacturers, but that's like a small portion of the market in comparison to the full available option out there. So why biodiesel isn't being accepted into the fuel market is because from doing a bit of research and speaking to a few different sources, my understanding, and it's not necessarily how it may or may not be, but my understanding is that within the fuel system there is an injector that the fuel gets pumped into the cylinders from, and predominantly there are 5 manufacturers of the fuel injectors, and 4 of them are based in Korea, and I think 1 is in Taiwan. And the only component within the fuel system the biodiesel goes through that gets marginally affected is the fuel injector itself. Because when you take used cooking oil and filtered it and cleaned it, you'll add potassium hydroxide and magnesium. So the magnesium gives it a slightly solvent property, which means although it's cleaning your fuel engine, which is reducing the temperature of the vehicle and the noise of the diesel engine, 0.2% of the fuel injector gets affected, and that effectively creates wear on the fuel injector. And for those reasons, the original equipment manufacturers won't allow more than 5% of a diesel blend to be in their vehicles. So, saying it quite tongue-in-cheek, being Korean-based, trying to encourage the Koreans to change their legislation, the manufacturing patterns, and so on, to incorporate biodiesel, which is something that they're not necessarily too focused on compared to the global market in terms of who uses diesel over biodiesel. It's quite a long fight, but other than the injector within the fuel line system, the entire process becomes more efficient, cleaner, and less noisier, and runs for less. So if you put a running biodiesel within the engine, it will effectively make it a longer lasting engine. Okay, so going back to the question, market barriers. So number 1 is legislation. Number 2 is the original equipment manufacturers are not allowing it to be warranted or included in their service plans. So also what this means is if, say for example, a transporter purchases a truck for 1.8 million, he doesn't want a single thing to go wrong with that truck because he is now liable for 1.8 million, and he's got a fleet of 10, so it scales up. And so anything to adjust the service warranty will be negative on the business. So for truckers to look at alternate fuels, including biodiesel, it puts their warranties at risk. And the challenge with that is when you go to the original manufacturers in South Africa at the head office level and say, can you please get a letter of approval to say that we can run the biofuel into the system and at what percentage, they kick back and then they send you to head office, be it in Tokyo or Europe. So it's a long upward climb, and then once you do have the documentation, the next set of challenges come in, and that is you're now fighting against the major oil companies. So your BPs, Shells, Caltex, and so on, they will have equipment on their key accounts site, So say for example I'm a trucker and or transporter rather, and I've got 300 trucks and I set it at a depot. The likes of a Shell, for example, or a BP will set up tanks on site, and that will mean that there is a certain contract that gets put into place. The contracts can range anything between 5 to 20 years to indefinite. Or alternatively, what will happen is that the fuel stations or the fuel providers will put the equipment in for free and say that should you put any other fuel inside there, they'll take the equipment off site, which is a hack for the user and also an expense. So for example, and the way this comes into another barrier to entry in terms of the practicality of biodiesel is if I'm a biodiesel producer and I take it to a large transporter, I have then got to get my own fuel line system installed and then bled into their fuel line system on site, and only for a 5% blend of biofuel over 95% of a blend of standard diesel. So from a business side of things, the transporters, although it does save the environment, it adds to branding and marketing because of the green aspect of it, that adds to the beneficial usage of their vehicles, as well as it costs less, then I think it's unnecessary administration to have additional equipment on site and also get concerned that they could breach contracts with their original diesel providers. So those are the three main barriers to market, but it does branch out from there in terms of the source of the biodiesel being quite expensive. So number 4 in terms of barrier of biodiesel would be the cost of making biofuel is a lot greater than one would think. So other than your business operational costs such as staffing, logistics, warehousing, normal operational, light, water, internet, there's also the acquisition of the biofuel, the cooking oil. So the cooking oil is around about R5 a litre these days on collection. So if I had a local fish and chips shop and I collect once a week their used oil, I would have to pay them R5 a litre per litre of sunflower oil or palm oil. That's before even doing the process and cleaning, adding the chemicals, distributing, selling, marketing, and so forth. So the reason why the cost of the source is quite expensive is because the actual market for used oil has sprouted up. And what I mean by that is other countries in the world that utilize biodiesel, for example Europe, it's mandated for them to have 5% in the fuel mix nationwide. Within that marketplace, there isn't enough supply to match the demand, so they have to import from other countries. Needless to say, South Africa is one of those countries, and for South Africans to make the biodiesel locally, it's too expensive because the South Africans are exporting it to Europe. So when the cooking oil is not being exported, it's also being sold into the township communities. So what will happen, which is not really good, is that the used oil would then be put through a bleach so that it looks clearer and then put into little bottles and sold to the poorer communities, which is excessively bad, because the reason why cooking oil becomes bad is because it becomes cancerous. Another reason why it's quite expensive to source the cooking oil from kitchens is because the feed and animal farms are utilizing the oil within the mix that the animals eat. So say for example, if you go to a pig farm, the pig feed has used cooking oil to bind the feed, which means that the pigs are eating the cancerous cancerous used oil that's going to our shelves and we're consuming it. So it's just not a great situation at the moment, but however it's a very real situation. That's what's currently happening. Be a registered biodiesel producer, seller and provider is about a 22-page checklist. I mean, don't quote me there, but it's absolutely ridiculous, the requirements. You have to give away, or you have to set up your business with a previously disadvantaged person. You have to source the oil from a farm directly that is not utilized for food purposes. It needs to go to an independent lab. The lab then needs to be to give the go-ahead to say that it can go to market, and then only you can deliver it to a customer thereafter, which is not really good for business, for timelines, cost, or the supply chain demand. So it's not necessarily conducive to the utilization of biodiesel in the local marketplace either. So there are really a whole bunch of reasons why biodiesel is not being utilized more effectively here. However, on the other side of that coin, there are a few wine farms that I did business with, and they've started to introduce it into their fuel mix, and I've been extremely happy with the results. Yeah.
I'm staying here. I've been here since 2013, and we're greening this strip of a street. It's an industrial complex, and of course with industry you can imagine all the challenges. The rate of waste to green, also the waste area, it happens too fast. We got to find ways of diverting the waste, but the space has become greener. Donations from banks, maybe for the trees. Standard Bank gave these trees. We made the boxes here for the trees to go inside. That brings in a very collaborative element in the street. The people in the street are supposed to be doing business with each other, making a little local industry so it can generate
the
an
Skills
income
Village
here.
has its own thing.
Sure. So with the plant boxes, some of the people in the street have taken ownership. They've either changed it, put their own boxes, like those people there with the wooden boxes. They made their own thing, so which means, once again, the thing we're talking about, they've taken ownership. They've moved away from our style and they've gone for a wilder grasses and things. But it shows you, you share something with people and then they take over. Like the security guards we were talking about, they were just inspired. I didn't say to them, hey guys, we're actually greening the space here, whatever. Just rocked up here one day. There they were, putting their own bricks there, making their own garden. Yeah. So, and I mean, they sit there all day and watch the cars, and direct cars. So for them, man, we still have to ask them how they feel. We still haven't asked them. I myself haven't asked them how they feel about it. But it was wonderful, because it was a thing that we wanted. The experiment that we started there by growing outside the crash there. We made those boxes specifically to see who's going to engage with them. Anything people have taken are sweet potato leaves and strawberries and maybe an odd plant. But when the gardens have been there, people have not. They've just left them as they are. Once again, showing people, that's kind of confusing, I think, to them. I'm just imagining. There's no fence. Wow, what do you think? Can I pick? Can I not pick? You know what I mean? Yeah. But as I say, sweet potato leaves from the Congolese sisters, because they call them Matembelele and Koma. Or Mozambique, I think, I'm not sure.
Sweet potato.
Sweet potato leaves, yeah. Those you cook, I think, potassium, something in the sweet potato, phosphorus in the sweet potato leaves. Something. Yeah. So, and the strawberries, like I said.
Yeah.
And now, but it's this whole space for an individual with sporadic partners coming every now and then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's Shane, it's Lily, it's you folk today, it's them on that day they decide. Brother Kutsu has come along, Simone was here with him, now it's Brother Simo. But there's one constant, and also Brother Stephen helps with the watering. Yeah. There's lots of networks. The current one here with Hanneke and Sebastian, we decided to go with permafunk and social fermentation. Sure. I mean, it was just a planting together, eating together thing. That's as basic as I can get it. Yeah.
The Heritage Day thing is also like bringing people together to kind of start that again in a way.
Yeah.
But there's
Also,
no
continuations of these gatherings,
It's just
get the produce
yeah,
there,
there's no real.
grow it, share seeds, create, I don't know, economy, but it is a small economy because, you do save, and it's good because, you know what I mean, you're getting quality stuff also from people who grow, people who know. I get most of the stuff from friends.
Do you go still to Bertram's?
I do go to the community Bertram's thing.
There's a nice garden, yeah.
Also to fill up space. And I have this, I'm sharing something that I have this crazy belief that the soil can improve a seed over time. So I think even when they give me bad seeds sometimes, I just have this firm belief that if I'm working with good soil, when I'm working and I'm really working in the soil, that seed, generations later, maybe, it's just a man's thought.
No.
But yes, I do get some from the community there.
Okay.
You go there, you sign a form, and I've been trying to tell everyone who needs seeds. People don't. I don't know how information gets accessed in community. People either don't know, or nobody tells them. Yeah, sure. But the city of Joburg, I don't put my faith in councils and government structures and things. I'm not saying that they're bad elements, but they're just there for me. I have access to that one day I go there. Yes, I'm part of the government. I go there, I access the seat. That's how I feel about it. So that happens, but a lot of the stuff, I'll be honest with you, I get from my friends and the people in their network. Food and Trees Africa, all the other independent greeners, so to speak, that sometimes work with government or not with government, but the majority of things, that's where I, as an individual, as an organization, we get most of our stuff independently, I think, from the people we know. Sometimes, like the climate train, that was a government activity. Yeah, an agency got us on board. The money came from government, which is us, the people, once again. So it's our money at the end of the day. Look, for me, personally, you eat healthier. Once you start growing yourself, I'm healthier than I've ever been. You know what I mean? I'm really, because I grow my own stuff. We grow our own stuff, No, we don't buy all of it from ourselves, but just being able to pick whatever 50% or sometimes even 80% of the stuff that you're eating in your salad. Hey, you know what I mean? And people that have come and eaten, I've seen their diets change a little bit. Hey, next week or whenever they see you again, I'm starting to eat greens now in a jokey manner.
Really, people say that?
Yeah.
It's great.
Sort of like jokey sarcasm kind of thing.
Some people have never even thought about eating greens fresh. Like people cook, they cook green leafy vegetables. That's how it's made. So to even think about spinach not being cooked is like you say, by saying I eat in a salad, people are like, what? So you can have, there's like a lot of, when you're dealing on the behavioral stuff, it's very interesting like how that seeps in. Even, with those security guards that started to help clean up the space.
So the physical space maybe takes a long time for people to get their hands on it and actually maintain the transformation. But as we said, there have been behavioral transformations, people eating differently or people taking plants home for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even thinking about taking plants. I also think I sometimes get a feeling of people taking more, I'd use like ownership for space, that they can also influence space. Like I think that's positive so it's not that it's only theirs, it's that it's also theirs, you can
also theirs.
Yeah, and I think that especially in a city like Joburg, but it happens in a lot of places. I think also people have been moved historically, maybe those things are still very apparent to people about home, but Joburg is a very fluid place, and I don't feel that people really think of it as theirs, So you see that also in how spaces are used, and I think it's really
it's a transition point.
Yeah, especially some places and even more than others. But so I think that also so that's in that environment. And then when you're in places where people have been for maybe a little bit longer, or for a while, or forever, there's also like a sense of, this is our space as well, and this is the path I use to get there every day, and like about just how they see space and where they throw their waste, and like, so I like that has been quite positive. That is also, it's also people's space that they can define. They don't just wait for government to come and clean that up or do stuff like they have agency. And I think that's what's so inspiring for me. Even today, like what happened today with us, or even me coming and there's like all this nice stuff been happening. It's like, I love the idea of just like agency, like people doing stuff, whether it's an individual, as a collective, like as a like bigger society. It's like that sense of agency and people just doing it is so inspiring, because people are doing it, and then it influences everybody else, and so more people are inspired to do something. There's like a whole pride aspect to some of that stuff. It's like taking ownership of that shit. Like, it is cool. We need to make that stuff cool. Being healthy, our heritage, supporting like that stuff, and valuing ourselves and each other starts with that stuff. Like, that if we need to, however we can get people to love nature, like it's okay.
There's
love
also
each
that
other.
thing that's like also that thing of just you own, maybe owning, that word owning, but anyway, use the word owning.
No, like it's
Owning your
okay.
immediate space. You know what I mean? Owning your immediate space.
Or taking responsibility for it. I don't think it means that it's only yours. Yeah.
The thing that everybody runs away from, responsibility. Take responsibility.
Also my responsibility.
For the sport immediately outside your gate.
Do with your waste.
Yeah. As soon as you step out your gate, that's your spot. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you could green that spot. Imagine.
But it's just, I think, about creating a dialogue here, starting a dialogue and trying to make it funky so people engage, like. A lot of what Ambush was about in the beginning was about conserving and celebrating, ecological and cultural heritage. That was the base of the whole thing. That finding ways to celebrate and conserve ecological and cultural heritage, and the diversity is so vital. Like, and the valuing of that diversity, that we, on all levels, the more diverse we are, the more resilient we are. Like, and things are we're going to need that knowledge. We're going to need those things because we're just reducing, and it's from all and agrobiodiversity and all that stuff. It's like essential. So that was, for me, it guided a lot of my thinking around that, and why we really needed to find ways to celebrate this diversity, and ways to share those stories and to capture them in new ways that it will change so many aspects of us, like also going forward, especially as a diverse country. Even more so, it has another complexity to that.
And especially our food. Wow, man, food, you know what I mean? Wow.
So
a lot of the just general health, man, it's just, of course, we all know food, the way people eat.
No, there's a lot of problems with all the systems, but this is about, I think a lot of what this was about, really getting the people who are affected, so like people who eat, to start to realize, shit, there's other things out there, and what is accessible, what's not accessible, and why, then you can get deeper into some of those more like things. But people need to be thinking about these things, like otherwise nothing will change, and if there are, that these powers that are creating those situations which are completely unequal, completely, they just cause, people can't even access healthy food in many parts of South Africa, So when you have that, what's available in the places? Why is it like that,
Sure.
And everybody needs to be fighting for this change. You can't only expect it from government and we don't need to be waiting for them to turn around and say, no, you need, we need to be doing it, and we can. We need to be doing it, we can do it, and then we can demand for it, and that we have a role to play as people on the ground, as consumers, as just general people. Or people, you have different, you're not powerful, but you are powerful, so it's not clear. Like, I think that's where Ambush has really been. It's like starting to create a dialogue really at that level, and all of these about just bringing people together who care. Some people, come together, it's like they really care. How do you get into places where people are doing other things, like who don't have this in their minds, but they are the ones who are being the most impacted and the least resilient out of every, often, because there's no options. There are already no options, and it's only going to get worse. Like, If you look at some of these things, and that's how to get better if we make it happen. Like, so it's very performance. It's like a performance art, really. We get in there, we get dressed up. We've got like these kind of tie-dyed, like overalls. Yeah, my overalls were tie-dyed. They don't look so tight anymore. But and we like just get into character. We have songs and things a lot in different languages to try and get people to like not even realize that they're learning. You know, so it's just cool. It's about making gardening cool. Like, you know, even we were doing this stuff, and then the Gangster Gardener was also out, and for me that was also like sun, because we've always been on this like Siblomile, like, which is just like, you know, we're just chilling on the street, but it's just we're just flowering, we're just blooming. We're like, that shit for me.
And we're greening the space.
But it's just like, it's so powerful because you get people
but
just
I mean,
to
imagine if it gets to that level
where
greening your street corner is the cool thing, you know, where you actually show.
And eating fucking imifino, like, is
And
like,
snacking
eating
on a
that shit
salad
should
from
be
around
cool.
you.
Why should it not be
A
cool?
little blooming spot, you know, it's blom net.
I know there's been a lot of like these very nice seeds that are planted in people's minds to create. I think that has been where we functioned, and that's been good because I've seen positive responses from that stuff.
We ambush spaces.
We ambush.
we
Siblomile
ambush.
And then it became an organization called Pollination. You know what? Huh? Pollination was the organization, more looking at kind of like trying to look at more holistically than just the garden. The garden is one method to create change, like and then there's a few other things that are all going on at the same time, really. So there's more this
the permafunk and social fermentation thing. That really started when Sebastian came around.
Yeah, so it was like driven by,
Yeah. Me and Philip had been working on something called permafunk. Because
Really?
me and Lily had gone to the permaculture course in East London with the permaculture people there. Now when we came back, or even before that actually, when I was going there, me and Philip were working on this permafunk idea. Sort of like making it more urban, you know, like the streets. Make it cool, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, no. The whole street factor. So I wanted to feed the greening into that thing, because, you know, people just buy too many All-Stars or too many whatever. So maybe you can buy 4 All-Stars and then do a greening with the, you know, the 5th All-Star maybe, kind of thing. So bring the street in. Perma-funk, because funk has got the, you know, it's like an urban thing. You don't expect funk wasn't born in the countryside. Sure. So Sebastian came and latched on. He's like, yeah, I know permafunk and social fermentation, because he wanted to brew stuff like beer, marula beer, local beer. He's interested in that. So, but social fermentation, where people gather and eat together, sort of fermenting.
I went and did my master's overseas in tropical forestry stuff, and then when I came, I did my research in South Africa, and we went together to the Western Cape. I saw all these like spaces throughout the city. If you've seen in Cape Town, there's just a lot of like these empty spaces in the middle of places. They were just vacant spaces, and it was such a strange thing. I remember speaking about like what are these spaces like being used for? They're just these forgotten spaces in the middle of other things, you know. And so this whole idea of forgotten space is really just, I think, for me, inspired what we started to do as Ambush, like really questioning how people use space, how people use the city, how they interact with space, how they interact with each other in space, like what is going on in those spaces, and like this whole idea of forgotten spaces and how those can be used to transform like the space, especially. And we worked in a lot of like dump areas.
Yeah, a lot of the transformation stuff is really in the dirt.
Yo.
To say, it's in the dirt, you know, because where somehow we targeted the place that looks the most gruesome, you know, litter, everything, glass.
And sometimes we've gone into the worst places, cleaning up and using plants to like green the space and to get people to think about space different, think about food different, because some of it was food and a lot of it was indigenous food because it's wild and it can grow without any maintenance. So then that brings up a whole discussion about indigenous food or just food behavior and all that kind of stuff. So and then there's also medicinal plants, and the cultivation of medicinal plants, and also the heritage aspects around those things. So it was really using that, and that stuff is the most adapted to the environment. So it was about the ecological side and this cultural side, and that's where those things link. So anyway, my research was all about those topics as well. So it was really like in our minds, because we were working together on the research. He came with me to help with translation, and like I think it really got us talking a lot about that stuff, like the concept stuff. I don't know if like
because we spent a lot of time in it.
We were like in it,
visiting gardens and communities.
Yeah.
Speaking to the actual people that have been running community gardens.
Yeah.
So it was full, and we were already starting to practice our own growing then, but seeing how the other people doing it as well in other places, you get a wealth of knowledge, that you can just use for yourself also.
You work in very hot environments. South Africa is super dry. People it's like the cities are just hectic. I mean, you don't really, but some things have taken over. You also see how things evolve, and we made a beautiful space. That one it was like a public art project with a graffiti artist that we were collaborating as well, and so it was beautiful. It was this beautiful outdoor thing.
Right next to the Maimai market.
Yeah, by the Maimai market, which is a Muti market, like in town. So it's also got a lot of significance related to, obviously traditional medicines, like traditional medicines. So but now if you see, like that place was disgusting. I mean, it was so disgusting. And opposite there, we work in like really horrible environments. Like the people burning stuff because those people don't have anything, so they burn to find metal inside to go to the recycling place. So and they're just like breathing in like serious fumes. It's like right there, so the whole place is just like full of shit.
Deep plastic fumes, and they.
But anyway, now you can see what's happened is so first the plants went through its process, and now the ones that have survived. So it's also kind of cool, and it's much cleaner. It's still beautiful, still cleaned up. It was a dump site actually, next to the river there. It's like the whole thing is just. So I guess it's just trying to get people to see space differently, even if it's people that you interact while you're doing it.
That was really a good place because it had people from everywhere, in the continent.
It was such a cool space.
So you could get plants.
Really showed Joburg like diversity.
Growing plants from elsewhere. You know what I mean? And really, and sometimes you got to engage with people. Some were from Rwanda, everywhere.
It was so interesting. Yeah.
If it continued, it was really a good space.
I think that
because everybody was there occupied.
As you see pictured here, this is a volcanic carbon dioxide vent, and it's a naturally high carbon dioxide system. Similarly, upwelling regions are naturally high carbon dioxide systems. So today's upwelling regions can provide a window into what future marine communities will look like. To understand upwelling, you can imagine the ocean as a layer cake. So we have deeper layers and we have surface layers. In upwelling regions, those layers are disrupted, and you have your deeper water being brought up to the surface. This deep water is cold and nutrient-rich, which supports high fisheries production. However, the water is also high in carbon dioxide, which means it's low in pH, it's more acidic, and it's also low in oxygen. I'm a graduate student at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I live near an important upwelling region off of California. This upwelling region supports many productive fisheries that support our economy as well as recreational fishermen. So where are the upwelling regions of the world, and is there an upwelling region next to your coastline? The ones that I'll be focusing on today are the eastern boundary current regions and the equatorial upwelling region, and you see those circled on the map. And these upwelling regions support productive fisheries around the world, for example, on things like sardines and anchovies. And we see fishermen in Mexico, here in Peru, in Chile, in Namibia, in India, and then also in the US, depending on these productive fisheries in these upwelling regions. So we need to focus on upwelling regions because they both provide a window into what future marine communities will look like if the ocean becomes more acidic and less oxygenated, but also because right now they're very important economic areas and because they may be vulnerable to changes in ocean acidification because they're already naturally low pH areas. From ocean acidification experiments, we know that there are certain marine organisms that are vulnerable to ocean acidification. These are calcifying mollusks and corals, and they have a harder time building their calcium carbonate shells under these lower pH conditions. In modern day upwelling ecosystems, we do see calcifying mollusks such as oysters and mussels. However, reef-building corals are found in very few upwelling systems today. Furthermore, in upwelling ecosystems, you don't just have to worry about acidification. We mentioned that the characteristics of that water is that it's also very low in oxygen. And this is important because some of the groups that we've seen in studies to be more resistant to low pH conditions, so not as vulnerable to ocean acidification, are the same groups that are very vulnerable to low oxygen. And so in these conditions, fish and crustaceans will be impacted by both stressors, the low oxygen and the low pH. For my PhD, I'm interested in these multi-stressor effects on bottom communities. And particularly, I'm interested in how pH change and oxygen change and temperature change affect bottom fish communities off of California. Although we've talked about how upwelling areas are naturally high carbon dioxide, more acidic areas, they're not immune to the effects of ocean acidification. And in fact, ocean acidification has been observed in multiple upwelling areas. And with the changes in chemistry that have been observed, we've also seen negative impacts on calcifying mollusks. The consistent findings are that things like oysters and mussels and pteropods and abalone are being negatively impacted by these declining pH conditions in upwelling systems. We also see changes in community composition. In these areas where pH has declined, you see shifts from calcifying mussels making up your community to more fleshy algae making up your community. So we're seeing real community shifts. And these community shifts and these biological changes, they're not just great for scientists to talk about, but they're affecting a lot of people economically. In the Northeast Pacific and Washington and Oregon, the oyster hatcheries have experienced a lot of economic costs from this because their larval oysters are dying from the declining pH conditions in the water off their coast. So animals in upwelling areas are going to be increasingly vulnerable because they'll be experiencing these multiple stressors. In the future, they'll be experiencing more acidic surface waters, more acidic upwelled waters, increasing surface temperatures, and then also decreasing oxygen levels. And we really need to think about the impacts of ocean acidification from the cellular and organismal physiology to the greater level of populations and communities of marine organisms, and then to the food web, because it's a healthy food web that sustains our fisheries. And the US is doing a great job monitoring ocean acidification off of our coasts. What about other developing countries like Mexico and Namibia and India that just don't have those same resources but are in these really important upwelling regions? Since upwelling regions are so economically important, we have to think about how ocean acidification is interacting with other climate stressors to affect these marine communities. And I leave you with this take-home message that some of our most productive fishing areas may be the ones most vulnerable to the impacts of ocean acidification.
I am Nelson Lagos from Chile. I want to take that some time ago I worked with the fishermen in Chile trying to establish a management area where the harvested stock can be rewielded to increase the productivity of this area. Those whole efforts was promoted across the whole nation, and in fact, this result of this effort was now in the national regulation protecting some areas for the fishermen. For instance, for the periods of the open access to the harvesting, the stock was very low, but after the creation of this management area, the increase of population was observed. One of the most important resources along the Chilean coast is a marine gastropods called el loco, that means the crazy. The loco is founded in high density within this marine reserve, and it's very low abundance in the areas for open access. However, this model of the rebuild stock of marine harvested resource now is under a challenge because these reserves are located in the upwelling areas. As you know, as previously told you, Natalia, these areas are vulnerable to ocean acidification. The waters that is upwelled in this ecosystem was in contact with the atmosphere almost 40 years ago, when the atmospheric concentration of CO2 was almost 300 ppm. Now, when the concentration almost reached the 400 ppm, are absorbed by the ocean. So in the next future, 40 years from now, 40 years from now, will be more corrosive, so more acidified, indicating this progressive ocean acidification in the coastal web. The logo, in particular, is strongly sensitive to the change in ocean acidification. We make several studies about that and demonstrate that effect on calcification, on growth rates, metabolism, behavior, and morphology, for instance. In addition to the problem to the corrosive upwelling along the Chilean coast, we have the input of acidic rivers to the southern shore. In addition to that, there are net sinks for CO2 in the cold waters of the Patagonia. The Patagonia is particularly important because in this area is located the most important farming for mussels, but it's also classified. In addition to the local producer of the mussel farming, there are more industrialized, bigger farmers. But in general, all of them are really concerned because there are strong mortalities and low production of seed in the present. Our research, taking this model species, the Mytilus chilensis, also showed a strong negative effect on production, on biomass production of these organs. In fact, projecting the result, we found that almost 30% of biomass production of mussels in southern Chile could be reduced only by increased ocean acidification. The Patagonian ecosystem, as I told you, is a net sink for CO2 right now. So it's being acidified as the other part of the global ocean, the polar region, etc. And this produced along the Chilean coast strong challenges for the calcifying of the organs. In fact, as I tell you, about mussels and these marine gastropods are impacted by oceanification along the coast. And probably the people relying on these marine resources could be more vulnerable to these impacts in the area. Well, to finalize, I want to tell you that in Chile in particular, there is occurring the ocean acidification right now in the upwelling areas and in the waters of the Patagonia. So it's important for us that this ecosystem service that provide the ocean sinking the CO2 will be recognized and used as an argument to reduce emission in particular. Thank you.
So on behalf of the Laos, EDI, and our friends from Cambodia, to give this press conference. So it is my great pleasure to open this press conference and with Cambodia. And since as Laos and Cambodia since many years participating in this COP but now take the opportunity to actively getting involved because the effect of the climate change become more serious. Laos needs urgently better transfer of the adaptive technologies for the agriculture sectors, including research and development on the local technologies and agriculture extension packages. We share our concerns together with our neighboring countries, particularly with the Cambodia, with whom we share this press conference together with our friends from UNDP and their country office in Vientiane and Phnom Penh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sionpon. Just to make this chair here complete, we still have two officers here, Ms. Kidalon and Mr. Ulai Tan from the National Agriculture and Forestry Research Institute in Vientiane and from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Let's now go into the background for this press conference. Let's talk about the main theme, the main reason why we are organizing this event here. This is about increasing problem in the Mekong River region. This is about millions of smallholder farmers and the threats to their livelihood that are coming up from climate change in that region. I don't know whether you are familiar with the Mekong River. The Mekong River is one of the largest river basins in the world, not as big as the Amazon, but for Asia, one of the largest river. It is located in Southeast Asia, and both countries together in the center of the Mekong River, Cambodia and Laos, they have 22 million people living there. Approximately a third of these people are living from less than $1 per day, and approximately 70 to 80% are making their livelihood from agriculture, forestry and fisheries. Amongst these 70 to 80%, there is a large majority of smallholder farmers. So farms that own a maximum of 2 hectares of agricultural land. And as you know, as you can imagine, agriculture is highly depending on the climatic situation, and any change on the climatic situation will necessarily affect those smallholder farmers, the poorest farmers amongst the agricultural producers. Closely related to that situation is food security in those countries. Both Laos and Cambodia, they have a good variety of different food sources from agricultural production, mainly to rice, but also to animals, to fish, and to products from the forest, non-timber forest product. But as this agricultural production is very much depending on seasons, on the rainy season and on the dry season, the flood and the drought coming with the season very much influences the situation of the agricultural production. That is always the case. This was always the case, and the farmers know how to deal with that. What is new now is that the rain doesn't come at the time when it is supposed to come. It doesn't stay as long as it is supposed to stay, and the dry season does the same. So all the tradition that has been learned by the farmer, by the farming family, they are challenged by a different supply of rain and the dry season. And the production side, the agricultural production side, the technology to adapt with that is not available. So this new situation challenges the food security in the country, because the farmers need to adapt to this, and it also challenges the nutrition, the quality of the food available in the countries, which cannot be maintained throughout the year, not in the same way that it was the case without the climatic variations. So food security is an important part we have to consider when we talk about climate change in the Mekong River region. I mentioned drought, flood and erosion. This is how the situation looks. You have probably similar photos and similar pictures from other parts of the world, but Cambodia and Laos, they are easily overlooked. Southeast Asia is all easily overlooked in the context of the big neighbors that they face. But this is the situation: drought, flooding of vast areas of land, erosion along the river, and flooding in the urban settlements as well. And as I said, the Khmer, the Cambodians and the Lao, they know how to cope with this, but because these events are now happening at different times, they need to have the capacity, they need to develop this capacity to cope with this. And this capacity is only slowly developing, it is limited, so the individuals and the institutional capacity needs to be developed quickly to address these matters in an adequate way. As mentioned by the representative from the Kingdom of Cambodia, the government has undertaken, together with UNDP, a few projects related to the Napa. So the Napa in Cambodia that we are presenting here is very much about water management, participatory water management, and improved rice productions. So here farmers are learning how to cope better with changing water resources, to improve the quality of the seeds and the rice seed production, and to mainstream climate change into the planning and into the curricular development of Cambodia. So the government is active to address the changes, the anticipated changes on the agricultural sector, but the resources are not sufficient. Similarly, the government of Lao PDR is addressing climate change in the agricultural sector as well. Here in cooperation with UNDP through a project called IRAS Lao, that aims on diversification of the farming system. So not only rice, but rice plus other products, agricultural products, vegetables, livestock, fish, aquaculture are introduced to smallholders to give them more options to cope with climate change. So water management, as shown in the case of Cambodia, and farming diversification, as shown in the case of IRAS, are important strategic ways for smallholders to cope with the changes in the climate. Again, you have to emphasize the scale of it is not sufficient. More needs to be done on a larger scale. We are not reaching here a critical mass. One of the main challenges have been mentioned by the chairman earlier. One urgency is technology, the right transfer of appropriate technology, and the development of local technology coming from Cambodia, coming from Laos, that can be used by the smallholder farmers in their country. Appropriate technology transfer and development, local development of technology for the agricultural sector. That is one challenge, the urgency number one. Urgency number two is to have the capacity in both countries for local research on seeds, on varieties, on species, on farming system, on everything related to the agricultural production in their countries with a focus on smallholder, and to develop this into economically useful concepts. We have two research institutions, one in Cambodia, CADI, Cambodian Agriculture Research and Development Institute, and one in Laos, PDR, the National Agriculture and Forestry Research Institute, NAFRI, who are equipped with good manpower, but men and women power, but the resources again here are not sufficient. The inputs that should allow these two research institutions to develop local research and undertake their own development activities are not sufficient, by no means sufficient for the situation that we are facing in these two countries. There is gradual strategic orientation on research on agriculture adaptation and mitigation ongoing in both institutions, and NAFRI has not so long time ago announced to establish an own research institute specifically for climate change adaptation. So we've been talking about the small effects, but we all have to look at the bigger picture as well. So if we look at these changes that are taking place, then naturally these changes will affect the yield, the agricultural yields, coming from these smallholders as well as from the larger agricultural production. Here we are presenting a chart that is based on data coming from OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, from 2009. And these charts tries to investigate the population growth, the changes in the agricultural yield due to climate change impact, and its effect on self-sufficiency. So we are bringing in together three parameters: population growth, yield, and self-sufficiency. Three very important parameters. And if you look at this, then you will see in Asia and in the Pacific region, the situation 50 years from now will not look very good if these figures become reality. We have here a severe shortcoming on self-sufficiency and a severe decrease on the yield. But it also will affect Africa, Northern Africa, Southern Africa in a similar way, but also South America, Latin America is not, and the Caribbean is not free from these negative effects. But there are some other regions which are on the positive side. They will experience some gain. So we will have losers and we will have winners out of climate change across the globe, across the regions and in each countries. And this is a priority to address it and to see what ways can be found to make sure that these losses and gains are somehow balanced and not we are dividing the world into the winners of climate change and into the losers of climate change. Having said that, it's about agriculture, and it's about agriculture in the context of development. Resilience, if we talk about resilience, we have to talk about just development. We have to make our goals, our priorities in line with that has been established as the situation in Laos, PDR, and in the Kingdom of Cambodia. So this press conference calls for an enhanced transfer of appropriate technology and support to local research and development in the Mekong region. This press conference also calls for a global focus and a regional focus of agricultural strategies on food security and livelihood of smallholder families, and not only the large agricultural producers and companies. And finally, this press conference also calls for practical approaches to balance the loss and the gains that will come with climate change within the countries, within the regions, and on a global scale. Thank you very much for listening to this introduction.
And I think in this case what the initiative already taken by the UNDP cooperation with us. We appreciate to this already initiative. Of course, we need to do more. We need to do more, and we need the fund and also the capacity building and the training as well. I think this is the good already case study. As I said, it's just for the agriculture sector. Maybe to go another sector as well. We need to do more because it's cross-cluster sector. So maybe water like Cambodia. So based on our NAPA, we have 4 sectors have already identified: water sector, agriculture, forestry, and health sector. So this is a priority. So I just want to add on that.
I think I will add more with my colleagues on the capacity building. I think we mentioned on the technology because as we know that the food security are very important elements, and now because of the population will be increased. So that's why we need technology to improve the agriculture production to be more sufficient. That's what we need for technology improvement. But of course, as our country still lack of capacity building, and the most important is to have human resource in place, fund support, and also the need for technology transfer and financial support for us. Thank you.
Training in my activity we put in some technique to farmer for learn and share experience for climate change adaptation. We use system training of adaptation technique to local people and local staff for learn and help them. Thank you.
And there is a need to develop that because it has been on the back burner over the past years. I would fully agree with your concerns, but I can assure you that neither Cambodia nor Laos PDR are countries with meat eaters. So these are not steak countries. These are rice countries, rice and fish that they get out of the river.
In the last couple of years, a bit more been talking about black carbon is both a major component of diesel exhaust. So when you see a truck spewing pollution in the air, oftentimes that has a black carbon component. My first impression, always getting off the airplane in Lima, is you can smell the air in some sense, and that's largely contributed from the heavy sulfur content in diesel fuel in Peru. It's the black carbon. Is that black sooty smoke that spews from dirty diesel cars and trucks. It has serious impacts for both public health and the climate. It is the second biggest contributor to climate change after CO2 emissions. It has a very short lifetime in the atmosphere, so solving it drives solutions and addresses climate change in a very short period of time. And research has shown that black carbon emissions can accelerate melting of the glaciers, snow and ice, and that they also impact temperature and weather patterns. So it's a major part of the solution to dealing with climate change as we go forward. It also happens to be a major contributor to public health challenges, causing asthma challenges, causing children to have difficulty breathing, causing premature deaths, and so forth. The World Health Organization has recognized it as causing cancer, so it's a major contributor to many of the health challenges around the world and around the populations. So reducing black carbon is both a win-win for climate and public health. It solves many challenges at one time. It's the kind of thing that should sort of rise to the top in terms of the challenges that we're confronting. Two important characteristics of black carbon I think are very critical to keep in the back of your mind as you think about this as a challenge. The impacts of black carbon are local and regional. So when that emission goes up into the atmosphere, it has a direct impact on the public health within that sort of local community. It doesn't tend to drift quite as far as some of the other pollutant sources, but it also has a sort of local temperature impact. So the temperature impact, the climate impacts are a bit more sort of local, whereas CO2, the gas tends to spread across the atmosphere and spreads the impacts across the globe. Black carbon has a much more sort of localized and regionalized impact on the challenges. It's also what is often termed a short-lived climate pollutant because it has a very short life in the atmosphere, whereas CO2 lasts 100 or more years. Black carbon has oftentimes in days, weeks, or months in terms of life in the atmosphere. And so pulling black carbon out of the atmosphere has a very immediate impact on both public health but also on climate change because you're solving that challenge in a much shorter period of time, whereas CO2 tends to have the impacts of reducing CO2 emissions tend to drift over several decades, and so you built into the system where black carbon is a much earlier impact in that. Another critical issue is that we know how to solve this. We have solved black carbon in many countries around the world because primarily it was a health problem that was contributing to major smog and children's death and so forth throughout many key countries in the world. And so we have many of the solutions available, and Amanda will provide you with a bit more on some of those pieces. And yet, in many countries, we are still finding that progress is not quite as advanced as we need to, but we're going to give you a bit of sense of some of the progress that's occurred in a couple of the key countries in Latin America, and then hopefully provide you with a clear pathway in terms of the next steps for the countries in the region to solve this critical health and climate solution at the same time. So with that, I'll be happy to turn it over to Amanda. Amanda directs NRDC's Latin America team, working in Chile and Mexico and throughout the region. So she's going to present the key findings from this report that we're releasing today that focuses on black carbon in Latin America from diesel engines. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks everyone for coming today. Like Jake said, I'm going to sort of dig into the meat of the report. I'll start off by explaining how we went about the report, and then dig into the sort of specific research we did into 15 specific countries, and then address some of the recommendations. And then at the end, of course, if anyone has any questions, be happy to take them. I can also take questions in Spanish and Espanol, so there's no problem either way. So Jake's already given this really great broad context of the report. And before I dive into the details, I do want to acknowledge two really key partners that helped out enormously with the report. The first is a researcher named Renzo Castro Mendoza, who really did an incredible amount of research, contacting countries, and his work laid the foundation for this report. And then the second group of people are Rich Castle and Joe Anati at Gladstein Leandros and Associates, a consulting firm in the United States, and they've done a lot of the heavy lifting over the past couple months. So a lot of gratitude goes out to all of them. So when we started doing this, we thought, there's a lot of information out there about black carbon impacts, both public health and climate in China, in Asia, kind of on the global scale. But what's out there about Latin America specifically? And what we found was not much. The data about impacts and about the existence of black carbon in Latin America is quite sparse, to be honest. That said, we did find two really good studies. One showed that the key source, the largest emitting sector of black carbon in Latin America is the transportation sector. And so that directed us in a very clear path to say, okay, if we want to solve this in Latin America, that's where we need to be focusing. And the second study showed that if we were to reduce black carbon emissions as well as methane, so two of the short-lived climate pollutants, that could avoid 27,000 premature deaths in Latin America. And so that showed us it's not only a climate issue, but this is a human issue, and something that's really worth addressing. So, again, there wasn't much information, but what was there led us in a very clear direction. But it did lead us to our first major conclusion, which is more information needs to be generated, more research needs to be done, more investigations need to happen about this issue in Latin America in order for it to be addressed correctly and successfully. And then what we decided to do was look at 15 specific countries. We called people, we emailed people, we spent a lot of time talking to governments, talking to agencies, NGOs, academics in these countries to really get a sense of their transportation sector, their air quality sector, or air quality efforts, their fuel status, and we asked them many, many questions. And so right now I'm going to share with you some of the results of this sort of survey that we did, which are actually quite striking. So the first one is that only 9 of the 15 countries that we looked at monitor for fine particulate matter emissions. And fine particulate matter is important because black carbon is a major component of fine particulate matter. Most people don't measure for black carbon, but measuring for fine particulate matter, which is also called PM 2.5, is sort of your indicator for black carbon. That said, there were 10 cities that measure for PM 2.5, and yet in all of them, as you can see here, the air quality of PM 2.5 was significantly higher than World Health Organization recommended levels. And then from that, we also looked at who's monitoring for particulate matter, or PM10, which is a slightly coarser type of pollutant, of air pollution, and there we found 15 cities that do monitor for it, but again, as you can see, all of their levels were significantly higher than the World Health Organization's recommended levels. The next thing that we looked at was vehicles. And what was interesting was, on one hand, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina essentially have 80% of the registered vehicles in Latin America. But the countries, smaller countries like Honduras and Nicaragua, have the fastest growing fleets. And you can see here the percentages of the growth rate of vehicle fleets in Latin America. Honduras and Nicaragua are far ahead, but followed by Ecuador and Colombia and Uruguay. So even though Mexico, Brazil, they have, even Argentina, they have a lot of vehicles already, they're not growing as quickly as some of these smaller countries. The other interesting thing was looking at how old are the vehicles in these countries. This slide shows the age distribution of vehicles. You can see there's a lot of old vehicles in many of the countries. This slide shows 8. It dips down towards the newer vehicles, but then it starts to go back up in certain respects. So the key will be getting rid of these old vehicles, getting rid of these dirtier, less efficient vehicles in order to solve some of the air pollution problems that come from them. This slide shows that, very simply, diesel fuel consumption is on the rise. It looks from 2005 to 2010. In every country we looked at, it is increasing. We also looked at which countries had good fuel, or excuse me, stringent vehicle emissions standards. And in that respect, it's not shown here, but only Chile and Mexico had pretty good standards. Other countries had standards or didn't have any, and all of that's detailed in the report. But Chile and Mexico were the only ones with the sort of more stringent ones. And then finally, looking at fuel quality, diesel fuel quality. As Jake mentioned, the sulfur component of diesel is one of the reasons it's so dirty. And so as you reduce the sulfur content in diesel fuel, it burns much more cleanly. And so as you regulate fuel quality, you want to bring it down to a level that's called ultra-low sulfur diesel, which is 50 parts per million, 50 ppm. Ideally, you want to bring it down to 15 ppm to really gain the most benefits. And so here in this map, you can see Chile is the only country that currently has, on a national level, 15 ppm ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. Mexico, interestingly, passed a national diesel fuel quality rule bringing it down to ultra-low sulfur diesel in 2006, but didn't actually implement it. And so we certainly hope the Mexican government will be looking to prioritize an update of that law and an implementation of that law in the coming year. And finally, this slide shows a little bit about what we're recommending. And I'll get into that right now. So to figure out what kinds of things we should recommend, we looked at other countries that have addressed this issue and have done so successfully, namely the US, Canada, Europe, and a few others. And so there were three key things we said would be really helpful here. One, as I just discussed, is cleaning up the diesel fuels, getting the sulfur out of diesel fuel. The second one is to regulate emissions coming out of vehicles. This usually applies to new vehicles. And so the best way to maximize the benefits of ultra-low sulfur diesel is to have vehicle emission standards at the Euro 6 level. And for more explanation of that, it's included in Appendix 1 of the report. It's quite technical, I won't go into it now. So the combination of these two things, the Euro 6 vehicle emission standards and the ultra-low sulfur diesel standards, as you can see on the slide, show that you can reduce your black carbon emissions by more than 95%. And as Jake mentioned, these reductions are immediate. It's a short-lived thing. So you can reduce this really dangerous pollutant by over 95% with two regulations. And that's really important. And then the other thing is to address, vehicle emission standards, as I mentioned, often apply to new vehicles. We also want to address the vehicles that are already out there. And so we recommend retrofitting programs which put diesel particulate filters on to older vehicles to allow them to get the same kind of benefits. And also scrappage programs, which is basically replacing the oldest and the dirtiest fleet, or members of the fleet, those old trucks, getting them off the road, replacing them with newer models, cleaner models, more efficient models. And many countries and cities around the world have already successfully implemented scrappage programs, so there's lots of models about how to do that and importantly, how to finance that. Finally, have two more sort of complementary recommendations. One is for governments to also look at other sustainable transport solutions. So looking at walkability, increasing bicycle availability, including bus rapid transit systems. And here, Latin America is actually a leader in the BRTs. In our research, we found that there's more than 45 cities in Latin America have BRTs. So that's great, and that's almost 64% of BRT ridership in the world is in Latin America. So that's a very encouraging number. And then finally, air quality and air quality monitoring. This is essential, absolutely essential to knowing what is in your air. You can't regulate, you can't clean it, you can't improve it for your people if you don't know what's in it. And so we recommend better, stronger, coordinated air quality monitoring systems. And all of these sort of recommendations taken together, we think, can create a much healthier, much healthier Latin America and cities in Latin America for people, as well as contribute significantly to global efforts to stop climate change.
Emissions Trading Association, the IETA. And for us, this cements the links that they are making between energy, big business, corporate polluters, and false solutions. But we in Friends of the Earth International, as the largest environmental grassroots federation in the world, look at energy very differently. That's what we're here to present. Our energy system is hurting communities, workers, the environment, and of course is causing climate change, while leaving 2.6 billion people without access to clean cooking facilities. These are IEA numbers as well. We are a week into the negotiations now, and meaningful outcomes are lacking. So we are here today with the team. Godwin Ojo, Director of Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria, will talk about dirty energy impacts and about the Africa Group proposal that provides a step in the right direction. Malika Perrault of Friends of the Earth France will talk about a victory that they had today fighting dirty energy in France.
We want to make it explicitly clear that we need a clean break from dirty energy to energy transformation that is required to address the problems of climate change. First, the impact of dirty energy is severe on local communities, is severe on their environment, their livelihood is in serious ruin. And if you check across Africa and developing countries, for example, you will see that the increasing demand for energy is leading to gross human rights violations, conflict, and violence at the site of extraction. This cannot be allowed to continue. Therefore, the lack of energy access is a major problem. Energy security that is seen in terms of militarization of the site of extraction is ruining local communities in the south. Therefore, the issue of energy access to local communities, to the vulnerable groups, to the poor in developing countries needs to be addressed. And this is why we are pleased with the African Group proposal on energy transformation, which seeks to promote a mechanism on renewable energy feed-in tariffs that is applicable to the entire African continent and in fact to the rest of the world. This energy transformation cannot happen on its own. It requires the finance, what we may call the carbon debt, which needs to be paid by developed countries to developing countries. We need to provide the needed finance urgently to ensure that energy transformation becomes a model to counter climate change and to ensure that community energies in form of decentralized energy, in the form of renewable energy feed-in tariffs becomes operational on a global scale. This is one way we can combat the energy. We need to support this African proposal that is going to help to change business as usual.
Thank you, Godwin Ojo. Malika Perrault.
Yeah, thanks. So I was not supposed to speak today, but we just had the news that this morning at 10:30 Lima time, the Société Générale, which is a French bank, just withdrew from the coal project Alpha Coal. they wanted to invest in Australia. So the environment director just gave us the news to the 3 organizations involved in the campaign, which are For Friends, BC and Attack. So this is the result of a long-term campaign we led during months and years, and For Friends was really monitoring the banks, sending them letters, writing analysis to make them stop their dirty investments. So 1 year ago, we started specific actions on this project together with international partners. So we have occupied their offices, we have discharged tons of coal in front of their buildings, and 2 weeks ago, we just sent a letter to the Société Générale CEO advising him that if he would not withdraw from the project, we would organize many actions during the year and a big march in Paris during COP21. So we know that all of this influenced the decision of Société Générale to withdraw from the project today. And the press coverage has been really useful to make the balance between the low benefits they could have from this project and the reputational risks. So this is a first step for the struggle on climate justice, and we will keep fighting the responsible of climate change who invest in dirty energy. But it's also a key step that proves that with determination and strategy, it's possible to win battles. Thank you.
And the middle class is booming from 1 billion in 1990 to 2 billion today to 5 billion in 2030. When you enter the middle class, this is a great, great blessing. You buy a lot more stuff, and especially you like to buy these. So people want to buy motor cars. So we see the growth of the motor car over time, and we see this astonishing pressure on the environment and the cities of the world. There is a choice. There's a choice for every city mayor, for every government, for every private developer. We can have this. This is the direction we're moving in. Or we could have something like this. Now it turns out that this is not only bad for the environment, it's bad for your economy, and it's bad for citizens. This is not only good for the environment, it's actually very good for citizens and for your economy. I want to leave you with 3 words: compact, connected, coordinated. A year ago, we set up the Global Commission for the Economy of Climate Change, and we asked the question, is it possible to grow your economy in a different way? Is it possible to go from today's low efficiency, high carbon economy to tomorrow's high efficiency, low carbon economy? And the answer is yes. In cities, we need more compact cities, we need more connected cities, we need better coordinated cities. I'm going to talk particularly and briefly about the first and second in particular. Here is the footprint of Atlanta, and here's the footprint of Barcelona. Barcelona has a higher population than Atlanta, but has a geographical footprint 1/20th of Atlanta. Per capita emissions from transport are 10 times as much in Atlanta as they are in Barcelona. But here's the point. Barcelona actually benefits also from efficiency gains by having a city like this. Let me suggest 4 reasons why more compact cities that aren't spread way into the countryside are good for people. First, traffic congestion. Many cities in the world are losing 4, 5, 6% of their city income simply sitting in traffic. In Lima, Peru, it's higher than any of these. It's about 8%, we understand. And this is just a dead weight loss to the economy. It's like giving away 8% of your city income. It's inefficient and it's bad for the environment. A second reason is that compact cities actually lead to higher incomes. This is something we're just discovering. I won't explain it in detail, but there you see population density on the x-axis and income and consumption on the vertical axis. Don't fully understand this, but cities that are more compact become more dynamic and more competitive. So that's the second reason. The third reason is one that China is very concerned about, and that is pollution. More compact cities with public transportation have less pollution and citizens do better. This is Mexico City, which is very spread out. Did you know that none of the 50 biggest cities in the world meet the air pollution standards of the World Health Organization? The ones on the far right, by the way, are South Asia. Many people think that East Asia has the worst pollution. The blue or the purple is Asia, East Asia, and the yellow is South Asia. So really the problem exists all over the world. It is unnecessary and it's very costly to the economy. These are some estimates. China does suffer a big loss to its income through pollution. This is simply measuring the impact due to the fact that deaths are premature and sickness is greater. So in other words, compact and well-connected cities can reduce pollution and improve livelihoods. Here's the fourth reason. Compact and well-connected cities actually are cheaper in terms of infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the kind introduction. So, as you heard, I'm representing organic farmers here, namely an organization called the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. We, together with our colleagues from the World Farmers Organization, have been fighting for putting agriculture on the climate change negotiations for years now. And the bad news is that we still have a lot to do. We deeply believe that agriculture is in the heart of these climate negotiations, and agriculture and farming needs to be in the coming agreement, climate change agreement in Paris. Especially in the light of the IPCC Working Group 2 report that has come out this year, and it has highlighted that the risk of loss of rural livelihoods and income due to insufficient access to drinking and irrigation water and reduced agricultural productivity, particularly for farmers and pastoralists with minimal capital in semi-arid regions, is great. So it means that those who are most in need of water, who are the most vulnerable, will suffer the most from climate change impacts. This has been clear now for years, but we farmers really feel it every day. We have to face it every day. And some of the countries have already realized that, okay, climate change is here, so we need to adapt. We need adaptation strategies. And if you look at those adaptation strategies that have already been submitted as the so-called NAMAs, then you will see that more than 90% of them is linked to agriculture. So it also, therefore, we also ask the question, why is agriculture not on the table when we talk about the climate change negotiations? And of course, as organic farmers, we would also like to highlight the need for more incentives for agroecological purposes and sustainable, especially organic methods of farming, which on the one hand create adaptation for the most vulnerable poor farmers and smallholders in arid and semi-arid regions, but at the same time mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon in the soil. So therefore we call on governments to launch programs to incentivize and subsidize programs for organic agriculture, as well as research institutes, including the CGIAR, to develop a special work program just focusing on research on organic agriculture. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our purpose of raising the voice of the farmers here is to address the concern of the climate change that has become a global concern. And indeed it is a global concern, and we think we must look for a way of addressing or mitigating the effect of climate change. Normally people have a plan B for whatever solution or whatever problem, but I think we don't have a plan B for the planet. It is this planet that we live in, and we don't have another plan B planet where we're going to move to. It is therefore very important that our governments, all the stakeholders, take a deliberate concern, a deliberate effort to avert the effect of climate change, but ensuring that every sector, because climate change cuts across all the sectors, not only in agriculture, but it affects all sectors. So it is therefore important that government make it an effort to put budget in every sector to address the climate change. Every sector must be provided with the budgetary provision to create awareness and sensitization on climate change. In my country, where my organization, over 90% are smallholders and over 60% are women, the effect of climate change has not spared them at all. So it is important that we address the issues that affect the entire community, which of course in my country over 80% are smallholder farmers and derive their livelihood from agriculture. Therefore, any effects that is negative on the sector that provides the livelihood is a big problem, not only for them but for the entire country and the entire nation. We are therefore calling for climate change issues to be one of the major agenda issues to be discussed at all levels. And since we are here in Lima as a gateway to Paris, I think the issue of climate change has to take a center stage. And if we are to address the issue of climate change, we should focus it on how it impacts on the smallholder farmers. And once we address that, we can conclude that we have tackled the problem from its root. Otherwise, many times issues of climate change are countered by lack of funds. But funds are being spent in a number of areas, but we thought priority could be given to areas of climate change. Funds should be allocated regardless of however small it may be, but should be able to represent the interests of everybody.
Rural women play a critical role in agriculture and are also agents of change. They are integral in preparing foods and so are the most dependable agents in food and nutrition, both in the home and in communities. It is against this background that we identify some of the issues that retards their development process in agriculture through climate change. One of the critical issues would be the long drought period, which results in the scarcity of water. And water is very critical to our nation and to our constituents in terms of production for their families, for a community, for a society, and for the world. The frequent attacks of natural disasters like storm and hurricanes are issues that affect the Caribbean, not just Jamaica, but the Caribbean on a whole, and should be considered as very critical issues to consider. The invasion of lands by reptiles, where coastal areas are affected by storm surges, thus affecting the livelihood of fisherfolks. In some cases, land spaces reduces the opportunity for livelihood for those persons who do cash crops, etc. We encourage the government to A, invest in our rural women indigenous knowledge by utilizing the recommendations that they make as best practices. B, include them in dialogues at all levels to ensure full participation, not as token on boards, but as stakeholders and actors, considering that they have valuable information to aid the issues of climate change, especially social capital. And 3, to review the impact of social capital on small farmers and more specifically rural women in order for change in the agricultural sector as it relates to climate change. I thank you.
Good day, my name is Tinashe Chavuduga and I'm here to represent African Farmers Association of South Africa. It's a national farmer association of smallholder farmers. I think I would say the preamble here is to say climate change is with us already, and we've started to see its effect in the agricultural production systems of most Southern African countries, with frequency of droughts and floods. And sometimes you find that you have these two in one season. You start with a bout of torrential rainfall, then at the end of it, it leaves you early and you fail to harvest because the season didn't end well with regard to rainfall. So we view this as a serious threat to the growth, because we've been trying to drive from the South African side the transformation of smallholder farmers to become critical players in the value chains of most agricultural products in the country. And then we have this challenge now of climate change coming to decimate those efforts. So we really think that we, like my earlier and my other colleagues have said, that we really feel that the climate change debate is should be actually be taken seriously at this present time in moment, because we are actually seeing the effect of it in especially the smallholder farming community. Now, how do we take this to the level of the debate where we can actually see the change we want? I think it starts with what you do nationally. Then you go up to how you can influence the global debate. We still think that there is a need to actually incorporate what the farmers have been doing, because they've got a reason for having started to work around trying to fight what has been affecting their agricultural production systems. So it's very important that we also integrate the indigenous knowledge systems in the global climate change debate, because there is a reason why farmers do what they are doing, and they have seen it working. So it's also necessary that whatever strategies we come with at the global level, they must also integrate what the farmers are trying to do to mitigate this climate change effect on their agricultural production system. Now, how do we implement the adaptability strategies? I think there's a real need for us as farmers organizations to act as an interface of what is happening globally and what is happening on the actual field or on the actual plot where you produce.
I get that, but it's impossible for people who live 70 years to measure how long it's going to take for a 500-year-old tree to grow up and be an apex species in a forest. That's the part that depresses me to no end, is that we really don't even understand what it is we're taking away from our future.
Sensing everyone's feeling of helplessness, Enrique suggests that the team meet with the one man whose job is to oversee the environment in Peru. Antonio Brackegg is the Peruvian Minister of the Environment.
En un país donde durante 500 años hemos hecho las cosas mal, ambientalmente, talado bosque, contaminado con minería, etc., hacer el cambio no se hace en una semana. Tienes que iniciar procesos. Y se tiene que trabajar con la gente. Lo que estamos haciendo es, primero, establecer las zonas de exclusión minera. En estas zonas no entra la minería, punto. Segundo, ordenar, formalízate. Comienza a usar retortas para recuperar el mercurio, etc. Y comienza a formalizarte. Y tercero, a los mafiosos a la cárcel, porque hay mucha mafia también.
Today, we have a Minister of Environment here in Peru that can block stupid ideas because of environmental reasons. That only happened in the last 6 months. It's unprecedented progress. So yes, we are going in the right direction. Still we're losing the war. We're winning a number of battles. But my hope is that there will be this click where paradigm is going to change. I hope we don't go into disasters. I hope we don't go into cataclysms to get to that point.
Como peruano, ministro del Ambiente del Perú, yo veo al mundo que todos tenemos que trabajar juntos, porque estamos en un solo planeta limitado y que lo estamos destruyendo.
We're at that moment where if we are not acting, the balance, the scale goes in another direction. In these critical moments, more than ever in history.
Also co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2, which deals with impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. And on his right is Yuba Sokona, who is also co-chair of IPCC Working Group 3, which deals with mitigation of climate change. Yeah, next year will be a good opportunity to reflect what is in AR5 and what's been ascertained since then. So I'll hand over now to Chris.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thanks all of you for attending today. Climate change problem rooted in the science. The problem, the understanding of the problem, the understanding of vulnerabilities, and the understanding of solutions, all are rooted in a thorough, careful, scientific evaluation. I've been privileged to chair the steering group that's putting together a program for an ambitious science symposium to be held in July of 2015 in Paris as part of essentially the launching concepts for COP21. The scientific community has worked super hard over many decades in order to assemble an understanding that is really actionable for the policy process. And we in the scientific community feel really privileged to be able to bring this understanding into focus in the lead up to the COP. Now, the climate challenge has many dimensions. Some dimensions about understanding the nature of the problem, the physics of the climate system. Some dimensions about understanding how the changes in temperature and precipitation translate into risks of impacts. Some about who's susceptible, why, what are the elements that are related to the pathways of social and economic development, and then a wide range of implications that are related to the nature of the problems, both in terms of preparing societies to cope as effectively as they can with the climate changes that can't be avoided, and also technologies and policy levers for decreasing the amount of climate change that occurs. All these have been explored extensively in the science, and we're looking forward to bringing together between 1,000 and 2,000 investigators with a large slice of civil society to present a comprehensive picture of where we are with our understanding, how that prepares us for action moving forward, and how the scientific community can continue absolutely essential dialogue with civil society and with governments in order to help the world cope as effectively as possible with what's really the defining challenge of our era. This meeting is a key event. We think that public attention on it will be entirely enabling for an effective COP21. It's not the only piece, but it's a piece that we're very proud of, and we're committed to providing in the most compelling and comprehensive way possible. Thanks very much.
The science on the scientific findings, and particularly build on the key finding of the IPCC of FIFA assessment report, and this is a tremendous opportunity and then to bring together three clusters for a productive dialogue based on science, the scientific community, and then the policy community, and the practitioner community. And then the science will not provide a solution, but it will provide avenues of solutions. And that need to be invested by the policymakers on one side and then the practitioners. And then the conference also will give the opportunity for a number of side events, because there is a wide range and multitude, a variety of action that is undertaken at local level, at national level, at regional level, and then to bring all those different elements in order to question some of the elements the science will address in the future, at the same time that will inform some policy decisions. So it's very important, it's critical, it's fundamental. And then we are all aspiring to move toward a sustainable future. And this is fundamentally, critically, what the conference will address. What are the critical challenges in policy side, in a social side, economic, and what we know and what we don't know. And it's really a critical, a fundamental, it will be a critical milestone in our move toward a sustainable future.
Thank you. When we decided to launch the process to get this conference organized, I was not at that moment on the French government. I joined the government really briefly after, with the idea that we need to really collect views within the community with in a way, gathered around the IPCC networks, and even in a broader sense. Other communities like Yuba and Chris has mentioned, as civil societies and practitioners. So one aspect of this conference is really to offer that platform, and in particular a platform which really deals with the problems and the solution that will finally make the base of the substance of what could be agreed in Paris in 2015. And we know that a sound and a long-lasting agreement in Paris would depend heavily, is depending totally even, on the perception that the societies and the governments of every country, the representation of the interest and of really combating climate change together. And that's why science is key, and has produced, because of the different works in the different countries, the perception of the risks that nowadays I can say is that most of the governments of most countries really now perceive that their interest is really to combat seriously this process which human activities has produced. And because the perception of the risk is there, is there the necessity, of course, to show, understand, analyze the potential solutions that are there too. If not, we would not never agree on something, because that would be, the appearance would be that it's too difficult. So understanding where the real interest of the societies are on one side, and on the possibility to change on the other side, are the key elements that science can provide as a substance of the discussion. That's why we position this conference ahead of the final process, ahead of December, with the view that we have to mobilize all knowledge possible to give some security to the government to know that they can fight even with their development pathways themselves. So that's the perspective of this conference, and we'll be happy now to respond to your questions.
A really important question, and the question is, how do we distinguish between the elements of the climate challenge that are fundamentally related to scientific knowledge and those that are fundamentally related to values, that are related to governance, that are related to institutions? And one of the things that has really come forward in the scientific research, especially recently, is a much better characterization of which issues are really values issues, how important those issues are, which issues really have to do with governance and priorities within societies, and which have to do with the way that responsibility is distributed between nations, international organizations, civil society. The scientists clearly can't answer all those questions, but one of the things we'll be trying to do at this meeting is to set the problem up with sufficient resolution so that those components that are clearly moral and ethical components are identified. Those components that are scientific in nature are clearly identified. And the other components that have to do with the workings of society are clearly identified. From the scientific community, we feel it's our deep responsibility to provide this level of clarity.
In the structure of the conference, while the two-thirds parts are based on the scientific findings, the last part is engaging a proactive dialogue with a wider community, including policymakers and the practitioners, in order to bring various elements that will help us in moving faster toward a sustainable future.
What I think the science can bring really very seriously is to try to understand if all the solution or the prospect or even the plans that the governments are putting forward are commensurate with what we have to do. I think the science can give us a sense of the transformation which are at stake. The science can really tell the policymakers and not only, of course, the public, the government, but many decision makers in the society, that to understand what does it take really to confront with this challenge and to transform the different strategies and behaviors, again, consistent with the common goals that at least the international community has decided to follow. So I think that's why in French we say the corps de rappel, how science can bring us back to really, are these solutions this discussion with practitioners, having anything sort of related to the scope and the breadth of the challenge. And that is, I think, that's why we need rigorous and deep understanding and knowledge, and that's why science can provide.
Thank you.
So this is a report that I brought 4 or 5 copies. Unfortunately, our shipment of the report has not arrived. We're stuck in customs. So we made some from the PDF and bound them in spiral. But I have 4 or 5 copies that Lucy has in the back for those of you who would like to write a report or write in the media and get the details in the report. UNEP has been carrying out for the last 4 years an exercise which has gotten quite a bit of attention called the Emissions Gap Report. So we're releasing the 4th Emissions Gap Report this year. The emissions gap is a pretty easy concept. If you think about how much carbon reduction is required in order to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade, and you compare it with the amount of carbon reduction that has been pledged by all the countries, they are not the same. There's a gap. So there's a difference of, right now it's about 45 gigatons, but I checked the report for the exact number, between how much has been pledged in reductions, including, for example, the recent pledges by Barack Obama and Xi Jinping 3 weeks ago, and the amount required to hold us to the long-term goal of this Conference of the Parties, which is 2 degrees centigrade. Now, as we've been producing that report each year, the gap has not changed much, unfortunately. There have not been many new pledges, but we have gotten a lot of pressure from member states to also address the topic of adaptation. So for this year, for the first time, we're producing an adaptation gap report. The adaptation gap is a lot harder to define than the emissions gap. The reason for this is written on the screen there. First of all, there is no agreed goal or metric for adaptation, certainly not globally. And second of all, adaptation for the most part is taken up locally. We have at UNEP a portfolio of some $200 million in projects, and they are local adaptation projects. We are, for example, building a seawall around Dar es Salaam and planting mangroves on the coast of Tanzania to protect from sea level rise. That's a local engagement. So given the local nature of both the climate forcing and also the response and the vulnerability patterns, it's much more difficult to deal with an adaptation gap. This said, we have taken a stab at this, showing what it could be, how it could be laid out. This is a schematic diagram. The top curve shows you from present to medium term, so say 2050. The top curve shows you how you might imagine the impact of climate change growing in the event climate change continues on business as usual and we have taken no additional adaptation actions to those already in place or already planned. The next line lower down shows you what we could achieve if we put in place new adaptation measures. We could achieve a new trajectory with decreased impact of climate change based on additional adaptation measures put in place. Then there is a gap, which we are defining as the difference between that level of ambition and the level of and what we could achieve, what we would wish to achieve as a society, either locally or globally. Now the concept here, the difference between the green line and the lower line is that societies will always tolerate some impacts of climate change. So there will be a tolerated level of damage, a tolerated level of risk, which we would not consider a gap because it's a tolerated level. And finally, the lowest part there are going to be, and there already are, impacts of climate change which are beyond our technical and physical limits to adapt to. We cannot build resilience to these. So the gap then, we are defining either globally or locally as the difference between the level of risk and impact that is tolerated by society, locally or globally, and the level that we achieve with additional adaptation actions. One of the most interesting, well, to the media aspects of this report, so we've already gotten several questions on it, is money. Previous estimates are laid out in the report. You can have a look at what they are. Some of the more popular ones range in the value of $70 to $100 billion a year globally by 2050 as the cost for adaptation. In this report, we suggest, based on new modeling results, two different estimates. The first, based on global modeling, we suggest the cost is 2 to 3 times higher than those previously estimated, so substantially more cost to adaptation. The experts who involved in the finance work also looked at this another way. They tried to look at all the national level studies that they could find for the cost for an individual nation and tried to add them up and come up with a global estimate bottom up. And there they come up with an even higher figure of 4 to 5 times higher. So both ways of estimating cost of adaptation are suggesting substantially larger costs by 2050 than the previous estimates of $70 to $100 billion per year. This said, as is stated in the report, these estimates are caveated by substantial uncertainty. This is a figure from the report. It gives you a sense of the difference in cost as a percentage of GDP globally, of what the cost for adaptation would be if we achieve the 2-degree target that the UNFCCC member states have set, or if we miss it and hit 4 degrees C, which is, according to the latest IPCC report, another likely scenario. Roughly, by 2050, a doubling of the cost would occur if we miss the 2-degree target and instead head towards 4 degrees. However, as you see on the slide, the uncertainty bars are large. You could argue, if you wish to take the lowest possible uncertainty level in the 4-degree world and the highest in the 2, they're hardly different at all. But on the average, it's a doubling. We also put in estimates of the current amount of money going into adaptation. Between 2012 and 2013, we estimated $23 to $26 billion was spent on climate change adaptation, of which 90% was in developing countries. This compares against the multilateral climate finance made available through funding from developed to developing countries of only 0.6 billion in 2013. This indicates that the funds that are spoken of here in the UNFCCC, namely the Least Developed Countries Fund and the Special Climate Change Fund of the GEF, the Adaptation Fund and the Climate Investment Funds are only 2% of total adaptation finance being mobilized already. The Green Climate Fund has opened its doors for business. They are fast-track accrediting countries and agencies for new funds. Their current level of capitalization is just shy of $10 billion, including recent contributions from several developed countries, including $3 billion announced by Barack Obama, but also most recently Spain. This is a new source of funding which will help to bridge the adaptation funding gap that I have just discussed. I'm not going to read those texts. We'll go back to them. Not everything is about money. There are many ways to adapt to climate change. In the report, we talk about 2 other gaps. One is technology, and the second is knowledge. There are numerous technologies that can assist with climate change adaptation, some of them existing. Part of the gap, therefore, is not so much developing new technology, but mechanisms for diffusion of technology, for tech transfer, etc. And I should mention UNEP has a Climate Technology Center and Network program, which is specifically designed for this tech transfer in both mitigation and adaptation technologies. Similar to technology knowledge, again, there is a lot of knowledge that is being developed for adaptation. Partly we are learning by doing, by putting in place adaptation projects, we're learning how effective they are. This knowledge is unevenly distributed, it is not diffused easily to the people who need to reduce their vulnerability to climate change, particularly local communities. And so much of the knowledge gap challenge is not so much about developing new knowledge, but about disseminating knowledge. And also better M&E means better monitoring and evaluation, better engagement of the research community in looking at this in a systematic way, how we are adapting and how effective the things we are doing are. There is significant potential to reduce the technology and knowledge gaps today. I'm going to now switch to talk only about one example to give you a little concrete sense of what, and that is the knowledge gap. This is an initiative of UNEPs to help fill the knowledge gap. It's done as an action pledge to the Nairobi Work Program of the UNFCCC, and I presented this to the Nairobi Work Program Focal Point Forum 2 days ago here at this meeting. In the Knowledge Initiative, I won't go into detail about how it works, but we have a methodology for regions or subjects, such as water, say, on how to prioritize what knowledge is missing to adapt. We had a test example led by CIAT for the Andes region here in Peru, specifically to be able to demonstrate it at this COP, and there will be a side event on this topic. The results of that methodological approach was a prioritization of 10 knowledge gaps for the Andes region in priority order, and some initial thoughts on how to fill them, how to bring this knowledge to bear on the adaptation problem. If you are interested, you can come to the side event on that, led by CIAT. I think it's tonight. Finally, I just wanted to point out, because we've gotten a lot of media attention on our claim that the cost of adaptation is high, 2 to 3 times current estimates. And put in perspective those costs against the benefits of spending money on adaptation. This is a paper that was published 2 weeks ago in Science magazine. I have the reference there. It looks at all 28th of November, Science. Looking at disaster risk reduction. They looked at the last 40 years of meteorological disasters and asked the question, what variable best correlates with reduced deaths associated with extreme events? And their answer is education, public education. The best way, looking at the past 40 years, which countries have suffered least deaths and how, to ensure that you as a country are resilient to disaster risk associated with climate change, according to this paper, is to build public investment in universal education. So this is just one example of somebody who's telling the world, from a science perspective, how to effectively adapt to climate change. And I think if you set this kind of multiple benefit of adaptation funds against the proposed costs, which are in hundreds of billions of dollars, you see that the benefit is not some ephemeral adaptation win, some resilience to climate change, but it also includes livelihood building, development, and education. All of these things are integrally related to adaptation because, as we all know, in these halls of the UNFCCC, it is repeatedly asserted that least developed countries are the most vulnerable to climate change. The obvious corollary is the best way to get off that list of most vulnerable countries is to develop. And part of that development and building resilience is education. So I just want to highlight that although the numbers that we provide in the report in the finance chapter are indeed large and scary, there is a big cost to society, the wins, if we spend that money, are enormous. They're enormous in development, education, and building resilience to climate change. Thanks for your attention.
My name is Hakimareng and I come from Kenya. I work with an organization called Indigenous Livelihoods Enhancement Partners. And it's a pleasure to have this space to put our voice to what is happening here. Lastly, I think we all know now that indigenous peoples all over the world and in Africa, including Africa, are people of the land. Their lives, their cultural identity, their livelihood production systems, their cosmovisions are hinged on land. And as people of the land, their livelihood systems are climate friendly. And so as we sit here, frustrated in the slow pace of these negotiations here in Lima, it is tragic that the people who contribute least to the problem of climate change, who have the lowest carbon footprint, indeed pay a double price for climate change, in the sense that they are in the front line of the negative impacts of climate change, but they are also affected by unsafeguarded response measures to climate change, including things like CDM and REDD. And I just want to highlight a few experiences of indigenous peoples in Kenya and how we really cannot wait anymore, because for us every other COP means livelihoods devastated and lives lost. Very recently in Kenya we have had two experiences. One of them is a forest-dependent community called the Sengwer in the Charangani Hills. This community have lived in this forest for years on end. It is an ancestral land. The forest is there because the community is there. Indeed, where forests are is where indigenous peoples are, and it's ironical that they're evicted in the name of conservation and preparation for REDD while they have conserved for for many years. And this community was evicted, forcefully evicted, their homes burned down, their properties destroyed, with meager compensation and without free, prior and informed consent for their movement. This is unacceptable if we are looking for genuine global solutions for the problem of climate change. Secondly, is a community based also in Kenya near a place called Naivasha, and Arasha community, pastoralist Maasai community, who are evicted to implement a clean development mechanism power generation project, geothermal in Kenya. Lives were lost, livestock were burned in homesteads and homesteads destroyed with no compensation and no free, prior and informed consent. And for us as indigenous peoples who feel are custodians of these ecosystems, we feel like the way the climate change is designed, interventions is designed now, is designed for market forces, for market interests, and less for local communities. And the safeguards become priority for us. But we are not only victims of climate change. As indigenous peoples, we are also part of the solutions. And oftentimes, we may be familiar with the vulnerability of indigenous people, but less of what we contribute to climate change. And one of the things we've done at the community level is demonstrated through research on community-based monitoring information systems to show how community monitor the ecosystems, how they monitor the environment, and how these results of daily monitoring feeds into their way of life. And it is evident from these studies that indigenous peoples, for monitoring for them is not a once-off activity. It is a lifestyle of monitoring, and this monitoring informs what they do and how they live. And therefore, we are calling for the recognition of indigenous knowledge in the national forest monitoring systems and the monitoring and review system. So this indigenous knowledge that has contributed to conservation of this ecosystem is useful, especially for monitoring of safeguards, the non-carbon safeguards, the rights to territories of indigenous peoples, and the non-carbon aspect of monitoring which the market may not be interested in. And therefore, we are here to ask the negotiators to really put a human face in the negotiation agenda. Remember that lives are lost as we bargain about technical aspects of climate change, and especially to integrate a human rights-based approach that recognizes the rights of indigenous peoples, indigenous knowledge, full and effective participation of indigenous peoples. And I thank you.
I would like to introduce ourselves. Professor Tanay comes from the Marmara University in Turkey. He's teaching renewable energy. And my name is Heinz Koppetz. I'm the chairman of the World Bioenergy Association. And we would like to inform you about the process of renewable energy as we see it and the problems we face looking at the issue from a global scale. What we see, there are many communities and regions that reach a tremendous progress in transforming the energy system to renewable energies. And we have a side event tomorrow where we explain this more in detail. I would like only to show you two examples from Europe. One a regional area, a rural area in a region in Austria, and the other one a city in the east, in the western part of Hungary. A region in the center of Austria with about 30,000 inhabitants, and they started about 14 years ago to change the energy system. They installed a regional climate energy with an office, climate manager with an office, an evaluation of their status, and set targets to go for 100% renewable heat and electricity by 2020, and also in the transport sector to increase the e-mobility. And now 1 year before, in 2013, they have already performed a lot of investments. Just to give you an impression, on the left side, on the upper part, this is a marketplace for bioenergy where people can buy chips or wood or firewood or pellets, a district heating plant, a photovoltaic installation, a hydropower plant, a wind installation. And now they have already reached almost 100% total renewable energy. You see heat, they have now 70%, they're going to reach 100% in 2020. Electricity they use much more than they need. Mobility, they're just starting. And what's interesting in this area, the method they use to transform the system. At the beginning it was awareness building, light hour projects, public buildings as first priority, the heat supply and the heat initiative, district heat contracting, renewable electricity. And the interesting thing in Mura is they succeeded to kind of mobilize the total population to transform the region to renewable energy, and in the year 2020 they will produce more renewable energy than they need. A completely different example is the city of Pécs in the western part of Hungary. In the year 2004, they fueled the district heating system completely with coal and gas for about 160,000 persons. And then they started to replace coal by wood and then gas by straw. And in the last year, they generated all the electricity and heat they need with renewable energy. A few pictures about the feedstock they use, sunflower shells, straw. But if we take all these local initiatives and look at the global data, we see the world is still moving in the wrong direction. We are using more fossil fuels in 2 years, 5% more. We are emitting more CO2 emissions than before. And so we have to think how we can coordinate these local initiatives to a global movement. And now I would like to ask Professor Tanay to continue.
Thank you very much. We can increase the number of examples. Recently we have initiated a global campaign, 100% renewables campaign. You can find the details in www.go100re.net. We have collected more examples of communities. This campaign is supported and actively participating World Bioenergy Association and World Wind Energy Association. Cities and regions which have achieved 100% renewable energy. There are about more than 150 small cities, towns. Many other communities, many cities, countries could follow these examples based on the gained experiences. Because the idea is to find a solution. If you do not target the solution directly, you play around in the problem areas. So each city should target this. Now, we take finance as a key, Green Climate Fund, to provide guarantees and grants. As we reported earlier as by the World Wind Energy Association, one major barrier for a fast switch towards renewable energy lies in mobilizing the necessary financial resources. Renewables, although being cost competitive, require a high share of initial investment. Hence, capital access and capital costs are often decisive, in particular in the developing world. The Green Climate Fund, we are working on it and trying to apply, develop it in different countries, these developing countries. The Green Climate Fund should hence provide guarantees for investors, in particular via national governments, by backing feed-in tariffs or microcredit schemes with public guarantees. The need for such guarantees is strongly supported by renewable energy investors in the developing world. Based on such new mechanisms, the Green Climate Fund could leverage out of every dollar invested several additional dollars, so that the currently available $5 billion for mitigation could result in renewable energy investment of far more than $5 billion. So we are working on it. This is a simple draft structure. Tomorrow we will have a side event. We can go further into details. So maybe I should at this point try to describe the irreversibility. Why we can't go globally to renewable energy? We are sure that renewable energy resources exist. The life on Earth is a product of the renewable energy resources itself. We are talking about the rest, the minor part of it, the detailed part of it can be supplied by 100% renewable energy also. So we have the resource available next to us, every day available. That's why we say renewable. Resource is enough, more than we need. So the technologies are starting to appear. We know that now many countries are working on waste to energy options, agricultural waste, municipality waste, and forestry waste, clean cut and etc. is becoming a real technology and it exists. We are preparing and contributing to REN 21 report. You can see the details over there, but the technology exists and it is cheapest. Regarding the wind energy technologies, this scaling up really huge since 1980s. Now we talk about 10 megawatt wind turbines. Each one can produce 100 of them can produce, when the wind is available, equal energy as 1,000 megawatt nuclear waste heat electricity production plant. So the technology is available. We have the resource, we have the technologies. What do we need? We need the decision makers who are on the solution side. This is the third thing we need. Resource and technology is not enough. We need the decision makers on the solution side. What do we expect from the decision makers, all the people who are gathering over here to find a solution to climate problems? We want them to be energy efficient. First priority is energy and use efficiency. The first practice is coming from Germany, targeting 100% renewable energy, and that's what they plan in their Umwelt- and Bundesamt, to decrease the total energy consumption from 2008 levels to, in 2015, 47%. So we need to have this target solution for all countries. The early industrialized countries, they are on the way, they learn by experience. Many people die, the cancer increases, and this is the solution they found. First, energy efficiency, about 45%, then the rest is a symphony of renewables. Not only wind, not only photovoltaic, not only geothermal, but before that, before symphony of renewables, energy and use efficiency. There is a barrier in front of this. Any country who have enough of inefficient technologies or polluting technologies, they are likely to transfer this to other parts of the world. So we need to find a solution for this. We need to find a solution to stop dislocation of obsolete, inefficient technologies to other parts of the other markets. So this is the other irreversibility. So we know that sun is available everywhere, so we can talk about equity. Second, we can talk about freedom, because anybody who has sun radiation and light next to him is free from the central authority, so it means freedom. Third, renewable energy means peace. We don't need to kill anybody to use renewable energy. Fourth, it's local employment. So in RAND report, the results show that now 6.5 million jobs are available from renewable energy globally. Yes? Okay, as a summary, because Germany is the leader on this, we need renewable energy sources, which we have. We need to go energy efficient. The third, we need to design the future cities and grids accordingly, because renewable energy is high entropy food, it's everywhere, we produce everywhere and distribute everywhere. So with classical conventional grid, we cannot manage it. So if we are sincere that we are in the solution direction, we should think together with smart grids and storage. Then we can go 100% renewable. So the last thing I want to show to you, a declaration from Department of Energy on September 17, 2013 of USA. The future arrives for 4 clean energy technologies. I will not mention the 4 of them. I will only mention about wind, but the others are photovoltaics, LED lighting, and electrical vehicles. These 4 technologies now are 4 legs of the clean energy revolution declared by the Department of Energy of USA. Let's see what happened with wind. So with wind 1980, with tax credits from USA, we see that now it is the cheapest option in USA, declared by the Department of Energy. So they have 60,000 megawatt, equivalent to 60 nuclear power plants, with blue energy programs, by providing guarantees and grants. No subsidies, the second thing we need to do, no subsidies